Thank you for that, Carrie. And I will say I recognize a lot of names on the session today, and some of you have seen us talk about this. So even though we update these slides literally every week because there's so much changing and we'll have some new examples to share, this will largely be a repeat if you've seen us present on this before. But hopefully there'll be some new interesting stuff for you. So let's jump right in. We're wanting to talk about adding AI to your daily toolbox. We know that there's a lot of conversation around AI, and there's different ways to think about it too. We try to break things down into a tangible way that you can kind of understand how you can use it daily. So a little bit about myself. I work at the Center for Public Health Initiatives at CEI. I've been in public health for 20 plus years. I could talk about public health stuff all day. I think the most important thing here are my interests that are noted on this slide, which is artificial intelligence and systems disruption. So one of the reasons we are leaning into AI on the public health side is because we know there's an opportunity to kind of break the mold in how we do some of this work. I will say, we'll talk about a lot. We're not going to talk about visual things for AI, but one of my favorite things to point out, this is my new headshot. This was actually a selfie I took in a Taco Tico parking lot, and I used AI to turn it into a headshot. So there's some cool things you can do out there. I'm going to let Taylor introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Carter. My pronouns are she, her, and I have been in public health and working at Wichita State for almost 6 years. I'm known as kind of a bit of a data nerd around our office here, and I'm really, really excited about AI and all of the different ways that it's helped me and lots of other people that I've gotten to work with in their day-to-day tasks. So grateful to be here with all of you, with Erin, to talk about one of my favorite things today.
All right, and I know you just watched a video about CEI. We could also talk about CEI for a long time, but we got a lot of really cool stuff to jump into. Before we get started, I do want to call out one of our key partners in all of this artificial intelligence work, which is Tatiana Lin and the folks over at the Kansas Health Institute. So we've been partnering on a number of projects, and we'll talk about some of those in a slide or two, but definitely want to call out the fact that she's kind of been definitely a catalyst for us moving forward in a lot of this work, both locally in Kansas and across the country. So we've had a lot of really great presentations we've been able to provide to various states and local governments and health departments across the country. And if you don't know about the Kansas Health Institute, they are located across from the Capitol. They're such a great partner in the state, looking at improving health for all Kansans. They're a nonpartisan research institute. So definitely a good group. So with that, some of the things we have been doing in partnership with KHI as well as KDAG in a lot of health departments across the state, we launched a community of practice. So we're trying to figure out how do we use these systems in our daily work? What does that look like? What are the opportunities? We just wrapped up a year-long process and now we're going into year 2. With that, we're working on a handful of developments of guides, resources, things that we can help catch people up who might not be participating in those community practices. We've been experimenting with closed loop systems and doing qualitative research with these types of artificial intelligence systems. We've also been doing a lot of trainings. We've been doing, it's not on this slide, but policy review. What are the policies around AI across the country, and is there a way to identify best practices? So we're definitely kind of knee deep in all of that. And I will also add a blog post that we recently released on September 12th, why and how Kansas public health could, I think we have that titled wrong, can be key in shaping a statewide AI roadmap. So not just public health, like we know that we're kind of on the verge for a lot of these conversations. So with that, objectives for today. We want to talk about the proficiency of creating prompts, prompt engineering. How do we do this? How do we use these systems well? The second thing is identifying 3 tasks that you, as a participant today, can do with these types of systems. And then also, we want to talk about the ethical considerations. There's always pros and cons, drawbacks with these systems. We're going to dive right in to what that looks like and what we need to be thinking about. But let's start off with some basics to make sure we're all on the same page.
Great. Okay, thanks, Erin. So starting at the very beginning, what exactly is AI? In the simplest terms, AI is basically a set of tools and techniques that helps computers learn from data, make decisions, and improve over time. It's like a smart assistant that can sift through tons of information and ultimately help us make better decisions, kind of like a trusted advisor. Google is actually a good example of a form of AI. If you type something into the search bar on Google, as I'm sure we've all done many, many times, it sorts through billions of web pages to find the most relevant results for whatever we type in, our query. And then that's what we've asked it to search for, and it pops it up. But Google, of course, is just a small part of AI. It's what we might call general AI, which essentially is used to help us just make sense of things. Can you go to the next slide, please, Erin? Thank you. So in terms of AI, though, where we're not using it to just necessarily make sense of things, there's two types that are kind of up and coming. The first is generative AI models. These are things that are designed to produce new content. So like any text, images, music, all of that kind of stuff based on the input that is received. So they excel in creating human-like text and are used for interactive and creative tasks. This AI looks like chatbots. It could be virtual assistants, content creation, creative writing, among other things, of course. We have a use case example later where you'll get to see some of that stuff in action. And then there are integrated AI systems. So these systems are embedded within applications, and they're there to just enhance the functionality by integrating AI capabilities. So they work behind the scenes to improve things like search results, personalized recommendations, automating customer service, and so much more. This kind of AI is used primarily for things like data analytics, personalized experiences, and automated customer service. So for example, after you watch something on Netflix, you know how it'll ask you if you liked what you watched or if you loved what you watched? Well, if you answer those prompts, it'll create an algorithm based on your interests and will give you suggestions on what it thinks you would like or should watch next. So that's just AI, integrated AI in action. All right, so talking a little bit more about how all of this works. Artificial intelligence is a broad field of computer science that creates systems that are capable of performing tasks that typically do need human intelligence. It relies on these algorithms to function, and they use machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing to do that. So machine learning is actually a subset of AI that focuses on creating those algorithms that allow those computers to learn from data. So instead of programming, every single task, the algorithms find patterns and make predictions, and it continuously improves over time, like those recommendation systems on Netflix that I mentioned earlier, or predictive text in messaging apps, or even your Amazon purchases. Like, how does Amazon know what I need before I know that I need it? That's machine learning at work, learning more about what I like and what I'm doing, and then it's doing everything it can to drain my bank account. Deep learning is a more advanced subset of machine learning. So there's machine learning, and then there's deep learning. And deep learning uses artificial neural networks with many layers to analyze large amounts of data. So deep learning is behind some of the most impressive AI applications, like image and speech recognition, and even like automatic driving. And then there's natural language processing, and this is an even more advanced subset of deep learning. So it helps computers understand and generate human language, and then powers things like chatbots, language translation, speech recognition. And this is the technology behind how ChatGPT, a tool that we'll talk about here later, that's how it understands and responds to your prompts, your questions, and your queries. Okay. AI, so this timeline is going to show you just a little bit of the evolution of AI, but the main point we want you to take away from it is that it's been around a lot longer than I think a lot of us realize. It goes back to even as far as like 1900, 1950. There was lots of media coverage around the idea of artificial humans or robots becoming a reality. Then in 1950, there was a British mathematician named Alan Turing, and he introduced something called the Turing test, which is also known as the imitation test, and it's used to measure computer intelligence. Then 6 years later, the phrase artificial intelligence was actually coined by a man named John McCarthy, who was an American computer scientist, and he is referred to as the father of AI. Then in the 60s, there was AI research that had a lot of growth. There was a lot of increased interest, some extra funding from governments and institutions. We saw some of the first chatbots. We saw some of the first kind of robots. And then in 1979, the American Association of Artificial Intelligence was founded. Then in the 80s, things slowed down a little bit. There were some internal and external factors that led to what is now known as the AI winter. And then in the 1990s and 2000s, things picked up a bit. It's what we now call the AI Renaissance, with advances like IBM Watson's machine winning Jeopardy, if you've ever heard of that. And then everyday AI applications like the Roomba robot vacuum. And then that brings us to kind of more present day, the 2010s, the 2020s, which is kind of our modern era of AI. Even just in the last 10 years, there have been some very significant breakthroughs and widespread adoption. Like Aaron said, we have to update these slides pretty much every week because there's new things that we're learning about it, and there's new things that are coming out, and new innovative kind of opportunities that we can use it for. So all of this to say, AI has a really rich history, and it continues to really evolve rapidly and impact all kinds of aspects of our lives, whether we recognize it or not. These are just a few examples of ways that AI is already in our everyday life. So our smartphones, they're like little AI powerhouses, right? Even your camera uses features like facial recognition or scene detection, image enhancements. All of those are AI driven. Emails. Got to keep those inboxes organized, right? Email services use AI to filter out spam and categorize emails into tabs, like your social, your promotional, your primary. It's just easier to find what you need quickly. Streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, like I said, they analyze your habits, your preferences, and they personalize things for you. Navigation apps, I don't think I could live without my Maps app on my iPhone. I need it to get around everywhere. And that's AI right there. It's processing real-time data, it gives me traffic updates, helps me find the quickest routes, and predict traffic patterns and suggest alternate routes too. And then one of my favorites are smart home devices. Devices like thermostats, security cameras, lighting systems, all of that is AI. That you can use, and it helps learn your preferences, optimize performance, all that good stuff. So like a smart thermostat could learn your schedule and adjust the temperature of your house for comfort and energy efficiency.
All right. So with that, we know that AI is everywhere, as Ali pointed out in the chat. You're not able to get away from these systems. They are increasingly around us all the time, and we don't even realize it. So with that comes this need for oversight and understanding and figuring out how we should be not limiting the use, but understanding how we should be using these systems, right? So there's a lot going on at the government level. So let's start with the federal government. Many people might know the Biden administration put out new guidance at the beginning of the year through an executive order, and there's a lot happening with that. And if you have never been to ai.gov, I would certainly recommend it. It's interesting. It's probably a little heavy for most people, but the basis of this concept that they're kind of putting forward is this idea of a AI Bill of Rights. So we as citizens, when there's all these AI things happening in the background that Taylor just talked about, how do we know our information is being protected? So it's a really great concept, and I would encourage anyone who's really interested in learning more about those details and what the expectations are for a lot of these tech companies. This is really what it comes down to. The 5 main categories: safe and effective systems, algorithmic discrimination protections, data privacy, notice and explanation, right? Because we want to know this stuff is happening, and then human alternatives, considerations, and fallback. So we need to know what's happening behind the scenes with all of these things. And the federal government's really taking a great lead on this. With that executive order, every federal agency had to lean in to AI to identify projects of where AI could help the federal government become better. I love that approach. They also hired, I don't know if it's on the slide, I forget it's the chief artificial Intelligence Officer, CAIO. Every federal agency now has these. They've hired over 200 professionals with specific focus on AI and how the AI is being used at the federal level so that we can start to understand how government can start utilizing these systems, learn the pitfalls, downfalls, and kind of be a leader in the country for how this stuff moves forward. And it's not just the federal government, states are doing this stuff as well. There's lots of legislation out there. There's fear of the unknown. So we're trying to get ahead of what that looks like. So this is a slide from the National Conference of State Legislators looking at what types of legislation has been passed so far, not been passed, been proposed so far this year. Most of those focus around governmental use because especially with the big brother type idea, how is government using AI? So it's not just worries about Amazon and all these private companies, but government. Making sure that we have things on the books for responsible use, looking at studies, education use. There's a lot happening with what we're looking at because again, every aspect of our lives is being touched by artificial intelligence. And with that, ASTO, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, has looked at specific legislation for public agencies and what that looks like. So what we're seeing is kind of a groundswell. More and more states are looking at applying artificial intelligence and creating legislation to help know and understand what's appropriate use for those states. And of course, these all look a little bit different because there's all sorts of interpretations. We won't get into all those details, but I do see a lot of folks on the call today, including Taylor and Carrie and I, that are state employees. So what does this look like in Kansas? Because I think most of the folks on the call today are from Kansas. Know if you work for the state, there is a state of Kansas AI policy from Kansas Office of Information Technology. And I got the link, I'll drop it in the chat. If you don't know about this, you should, and you should certainly take a look at those details. So your organizations might have policies as well, but if you are a state agency or employee, like you should know about these things. I actually really appreciate this policy from the state. So this is actually a summary that was generated by ChatGPT of that policy. And what we have bolded is I think one of the biggest things is, well, start with the first bullet. The reason I like this policy is because they recognize the potential. So they're not just saying, don't use it. They're saying, this has potential. We need to learn how to do this. And then it goes into a lot of really good examples of the things we like to kind of preach about, which is what's bolded, making sure that human overview of responses for accuracy, appropriateness, privacy, security, all of those things are happening. So we're not just turning things over to these systems and letting them go. And I will say this might be a good time to say, we use the term Gen AI as much as possible, generative AI. We talk a lot about ChatGPT. It is one example of a generative AI system. It's one of the ones we like the best. We've experimented with a lot of the different systems. ChatGPT is one that you can get a free user. We'll walk through that. So we kind of lean into using ChatGPT as our main example. So let's get into some of the fun stuff. Why and how to use these types of systems in your everyday work. Let's talk about ChatGPT itself. As Taylor kind of walked us through some of those details, it's just a chatbot. It's powered by artificial intelligence. It's that large language model, so it can understand our text, our language, our nuances. It understands sarcasm and jokes. So that's where the artificial intelligence piece really starts to kick in. We could get into some of the details about the deep learning algorithms that Taylor mentioned. I don't think we need to do that. Happy to do that on the side if anybody wants, but this goes back to kind of what she was mentioning, where it's not just an old-fashioned Google search anymore that goes out and looks for those keywords. It understands what we're asking, why we're asking, brings context to that, and can give responses just like having a conversation. So when we do these things in ChatGPT, on the left is what we think we look like, right? Super sci-fi, we're doing all these cool tech things. What we actually look like is just a nerd laughing at our computer because we're so thrilled about some of the things that we're getting out of these systems. So a little bit of reality check for us. This is nothing that fancy. It is literally, it's the same concepts of a Google search that we've probably all done for the last 15, 20 years of how we interact with these systems, where we put a prompt in, we get a response back. So OpenAI, as Taylor mentioned, started in 2020, and then in 2022 released ChatGPT, gave everybody the ability to log in and have access to these systems. I won't repeat some of this stuff. It's largely what I've already mentioned. But what we have to realize is these systems, they don't just learn and grow on their own. What's happening in the background is coders, right, are coming in, taking a look at how people are using the systems, the types of responses, those thumbs up and thumbs down, you give responses, and then they do upgrades to these systems. So they're not all knowing and learning and growing on their own. There's a lot that goes into these. And one of the biggest things I like to point out, because there are valid concerns with AI, systems like ChatGPT that follow all the rules, they have safeguards in place. You can't ask it to do anything illegal or inappropriate. It will flat out tell you no. That's not the case with all AI systems throughout the world, but here in the US and certainly the EU, the European Union, like that's something that we're really focusing on from a legal standpoint. So data privacy is one of the biggest things we talk about. I like to always say, even though ChatGPT has protections in it, anything you put in this system, you should consider it the same as stapling it on a billboard outside of your office, because we don't always know exactly where those things are going. There is a way to buy into these systems, create closed loops, have additional protections. But if you are using the free version, for sure, we need to be careful about what we're putting in these systems. So we always tell people, if you're questioning whether or not you should put something in like ChatGPT, there's probably a reason you're questioning it, and you probably shouldn't do it. So be cognizant of that and ask questions. One of the things we want to make sure people recognize is this is kind of an exploratory age. We have to be having these conversations and not letting people or forcing people to hide what they're doing.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, so some examples of what you can be doing with ChatGPT and not, kind of hiding some things that you can talk about with your colleagues or you can talk about with us or whoever. These are just some examples of how you can use it in some of your day-to-day work. By the way, I often lovingly refer to ChatGPT as our intern because that's kind of what it is. It's a really good tool for putting things together, but like Erin kind of has talked about, it's so important to review anything that comes out of it. But we use it for all kinds of tasks here. And we've heard of people using it for all kinds of other things too, like preparing recruitment materials. It's helped us craft job postings, recruitment flyers, things that are engaging and effective. One of our examples later that we'll talk about dives a little bit more into that too. When it comes to proofreading memos, we've used it to catch typos, awkward phrasing, making sure everything is polished, professional in the tone that we want it. Formatting meeting minutes, it can organize meeting agendas, it can check to make sure that the details are easy to read and easy to reference. It can help us create social media posts that are creative and engaging. I'm so bad at Instagram captions. I've used it so many times for that. ChatGPT also can be a sounding board for some of our ideas, right? So it can provide feedback, maybe some new perspectives. If you have like a presentation coming up to a certain audience, you can ask it to review your presentation and then give you questions that might come up from your presentation. It can also simplify complicated tasks and turn text into plain language, making it easier to understand. It can translate information into other languages to help communication with a diverse audience. I don't personally speak other languages though. So if I put something into ChatGPT and I ask it to translate into a different language, there's no way for me, Taylor, to review that to make sure that it is actually accurate. So again, always important that whatever you're putting in is related to something that you actually know a thing or two about so that you can review it. Oh, I think I mentioned the role-playing scenarios already. Anyway, yep, these are all things that we've used it in the past. And really, these examples are just here to show how versatile it can be in even just everyday tasks and kind of promote that innovation in our work. It's like an extra team member who's just happy to jump in and help. So as we talk about some of these practical examples and think about what that could look like in your work too, again, it's really important to keep in mind that we have to balance the opportunities that are provided here with Gen AI and the concerns that might be raised through it. So on the left, you're going to see some key opportunities that it can offer, like it can help us identify those blind spots and come up with proactive solutions faster than traditional methods. It can introduce innovative approaches to our workflow, can make our processes smoother, more efficient, whether that's through organizing information or improving clarity, or even simplifying some complicated language. It can also be a really powerful tool for advancing equity in the workplace, right? Help us think outside the box and produce some creative ideas that can support diverse perspectives. However, it is also really, really, really important to be aware of some of those challenges too that you'll see on the right. So accuracy, of course, like we've mentioned, is always a concern. As is the potential for bias in the data that AI models are trained on. Data privacy, Aaron talked about a little bit ago, but it's another important issue, particularly when we're handling sensitive information. We always say that you shouldn't put anything into ChatGPT or Gen AI that you wouldn't want to put on a billboard. Additionally, AI might not always understand the full context or the full relevance of certain information. It's an intern, and you can tell it to imagine that it's an expert on something, but you have to provide relevant context in order for it to be really helpful. And also, we can't forget about the environmental impacts of AI, particularly, I know there's been lots of things in the news and media about energy that can be used to train some of the large models. So that is also something to be aware of and consider. But as we move forward with Gen AI, it's, again, important to just keep both those opportunities and those concerns in mind so that we can use the technology responsibly and effectively in the work that we do. So to effectively implement and start using Gen AI in the work that we're doing, it's so important to start by asking yourself the right questions. So first, we need to consider what tasks would actually be beneficial to use from using AI. Thank you, Aaron. So which might still be better purported by other tools, though. So not every task requires AI. For example, a task that might benefit from using AI could be quickly scanning through lengthy documents and providing concise summaries. But on the other hand, a task that might not require AI could be like a decision-making process that involves some personal, ethical, or nuanced judgment, or anything that you wouldn't want to actually put into the system. So in these cases, human intuition and emotional intelligence are much more valuable than automated suggestions. So it's all about finding the right balance. Second, when we're thinking about those tasks, we need to assess which ones involve sensitive information or data privacy concerns. So we should avoid using AI for anything that could compromise confidentiality. Again, don't give it or tell it anything that you wouldn't want plastered on a billboard in your hometown. Lastly, it's important to evaluate the current level of AI literacy within the organization. So do people have the knowledge or skills that are needed to use these tools effectively, or are there gaps that maybe a training, maybe like this, or maybe something more intensive could help kind of address? And then as noted on the bottom, it's also really important that we approach any information provided by tools like ChatGPT with oversight, ensuring that we follow the best practices, maintain accuracy, and overall integrity in the work. Okay, so I know there's several of you on camera today. How many of you have actually logged into ChatGPT? You can just raise your hand. I'll just scroll through. Logged in. Cool. I see a lot of hands up. Awesome. Okay, well, for folks who did not raise their hand and are interested in seeing what ChatGPT looks like, we have a couple of screenshots here that we can show you. Oh, awesome. I saw in the chat you use CoPilot. Cool. I would love to learn more about CoPilot. I use ChatGPT primarily, but CoPilot seems like a really great tool too. Okay, so when you open up ChatGPT, this is what it's going to look like, minus those orange arrows and whatnot, of course. At the bottom of the screen, there's a little gray box where you type in your query. I guess it's not the bottom anymore, it's in the middle. And then that's where you would type in your prompt or what you want it to do. Then on the left sidebar, you're going to see a list. Those are the prompts that you've done in the past. So it's your prompt history. And it's really great because you can actually go revisit prompts that you've done in the past and continue asking it more questions if you feel the need to revisit. Okay, and then this is where you will see an example of a prompt that you would put in. So you type your current prompt in that box, and then you just click on that little black arrow to send it off into ChatGPT land. And then when you do that, in just a few seconds, it's going to use whatever that prompt was in order to give you an output. And it'll look a lot like this. Your past prompt will be saved in that history. It'll eventually not say new chat. It'll be changed to kind of reflect whatever that first prompt in this thread was. But it'll just automatically do that. And you can just go through and you can ask it continued questions. You can copy and paste it and put it into a Word document and edit there. But that's basically an overview of what ChatGPT kind of looks like for folks who might not know.
Yeah, and as noted in the chat about CoPilot, I do want to emphasize again, we're really talking about all Gen AI systems, and there's a lot out there, and there's more coming, and we find new ones every probably 2 weeks that we really like to explore and experiment with. But ChatGPT is the one that we continually say. It's not necessarily because we endorse it, so I do want to throw that out there. It's really about how we use these systems and what we can do. And when we do this, we like to talk about ABCs. Let's keep it simple. We can use these systems to assess things and help advise us on, documents or language. It can also help us brainstorm on ideas and concepts and how we might approach something. And it can also help us create something, whether it's from scratch or from previous prompts or something that we drop in there. So there's a lot that we can do, and we like to walk through all these elements. When we do workshops with folks where we dive into things, you'll see some examples today of that, but we really like to get people more comfortable with understanding the prompts that go behind getting good in these systems to do these things. So prompting, I think I mentioned before, we call this prompt engineering. The prompt is just the thing you put in there, what Taylor just showed. That you can ask lots of basic things in a prompt. You can also get really good at it. So we're going to talk about that. There are bad prompts and less helpful prompts. I always think of it like when you go to a restaurant, if you say, I'm hungry, give me food, you don't know what you're going to get. If you say, I'm hungry, give me a hamburger, okay, we're in the right direction, but what do you want as a side? Do you want tomato, pickle, ketchup? Like those things matter. So the more context we give and the more detail we have, the better our results are going to be. That's really the basis of prompt engineering and being good at prompting. So a couple of tips, keep things clear, avoid ambiguity. We like to say keep it brief. I give really long prompts sometimes. You can get complex, but if things are complex, you can break it down. You can ask about different parts, and then you can tell the system, let's add all this together and work on an idea or a concept. Certainly think about keywords. If there's specific things that you want called out, you can ask about tone. It's going to spit things out kind of in a generic ChatGPT tone, kind of robotic. But if you want to change that, if you want to change the style or the tone, make sure you say that in your prompt. You also want to make sure the things you put in there are neutral and unbiased, because again, the system understands context. So if you ask it kind of biased questions, it's going to give you biased answers. Sometimes it'll catch that and call it out, but not always. So we want to be aware of the way in which we're asking these things. And I always say continuously refine your prompt, keep asking for more detail from the system. Don't just assume what it gives you is the best answer you're going to get. So I think, Taylor, we're a little behind time, so I'm going to speed through some of these so we can get to the first use case. We like to bucket out these prompts and ideas. And so learning prompt, I'm not going to go over all of these. I love explain something to me like I'm a 5-year-old, especially with my little kids. It can help me develop some good language to communicate with them. I love the idea of you can say, tell me about the water cycle. And it'll tell you a summary about the water cycle. But if you change that prompt to what's in the top left, I want to learn about the water cycle, identify and share the most important 20% of learnings on that topic that will help me understand 80% of it. That bit of context will completely change the type of answer that you get from the system, because it knows you're not just wanting a summary, you're wanting like the meat of what this topic is. So a good example of how we can use those learning prompts. And a lot of people say, I don't like ChatGPT because it doesn't give me citations. It can, it will, sometimes automatically, but you could always ask for it. So don't be afraid for that. Productivity prompts, some of these are things we've already went over, but this is so you can see what it looks like. You can have it draft you an agenda. You can ask it to generate a checklist for evaluating, whatever it is you might be working on. You're never going to be like a new expert overnight on some of these things, but you can have it ask questions that you should ask about a topic. So even though you're not going to be the smartest person in the room on it, you'll have some really good questions to ask about whatever that topic might be. We all struggle with SMART objectives and those frameworks. You can put stuff in the system and it'll spit those out for you. So it can definitely help you be more productive. We've talked about editing, proofreading. It's definitely really good at changing bullets to a narrative or narrative to bullet form if you're doing something with slides or you need to change some of those things up. As Taylor mentioned, proofreading, grammar, identifying some of the things that we might say that folks that, especially if they're non-English speakers, that they might get confused about some of those nuances. So a lot of good ways we can go about that. And I always like to tell people, yes, we're talking about work, but you got to get comfortable with this system. And you can do that with some fun prompts as well. I use it all the time for recipes. Hey, I've got chicken, broccoli, and this. Give me 3 dinner options. Oh, that one sounds great. Now, pretend you're a like 5-star chef. Give me a recipe for that. So you can keep having those conversations and build on it. It's great for ideas for traveling. I know everyone thinks I'm nuts. Taylor mentioned the role-playing thing. I keep saying this because you can tell it about characters that you want to converse with and have it role play with you, especially if you're having like a difficult HR type conversation. It is really great at having you think through responses. With that, all of this goes back to the idea of critical thinking that goes along with this prompt generation. So some of our rules of thumb: always ask for clarification. Don't just accept what it gives you. Challenge the assumptions that it might be making. Request examples of things. Consider alternatives. You can ask the same prompt multiple times and get different answers. So lean into that, explore that. And I guess I got more to say, but we'll see it in the example. So before we jump into our first example, I know I'm missing a few things in the chat. Curious, for those of you that are using Gen AI systems, or now you might be inspired by it, give us a rundown in the chat. What types of ways might you use this system in the coming year? We'll give a second for that to populate a few of those, and then we'll jump on forward. Are there any new ideas, or maybe share how you've used it in the past? Polishing emails. It's a good way to put it. Policies and procedures. We're going to talk about a little bit of that. Summarize meeting notes. Inspiration when you have writer's block. I love brainstorming. Of the ABCs, brainstorming is my favorite. Annual evaluations. So I tried to get the system to do annual performance appraisals, and it didn't do well. What I got out of the system was ask me the types of questions I need to be thinking through when I do my performance appraisals, and it gives me the questions that I would answer. So again, it's rethinking. It's not going to be able to do all the work for you. At least it can't, it shouldn't for some of these things, but to be able to help you process and rethink how to go about some of these things is a really cool way to use these systems. All right, well, thanks for all those. Let's get into some examples. When Taylor and I do these workshops, and Tatiana as well that I mentioned earlier, we will always change up the examples that we use, the use cases, based on the audience. And because this was kind of an audience that was thrown out there for lots of people to jump into, we've done presentations for human resource groups. So we kind of leaned into that because I think most everyone can relate to the examples and the prompts that we're going to be going over. So Taylor, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Okay. Like you said, we use different examples of use cases every time we present. For today, we're going to lean on to something that most every organization struggles with, and that is job descriptions. So, Aaron, could you go to the next slide? Before we get into the example, just to re-emphasize, in case it was not clear, it is so crucial, if you take anything away from today, to remember that creating and or updating documents based on changes or information provided by ChatGPT should be approached with careful oversight and adherence to best practices in the field. It's on its own slide, bold and underlined, so you know it is important. And that's because while ChatGPT, of course, is helpful for generating and interpreting text or content, we have to ensure that what it creates is both accurate and reliable. So always double check the facts, cross-reference, trusted resources, all that good stuff. This is just an example of something that the Society for Human Resource Managers put together. They released a playbook and are leaning into all of the different HR areas and the ways that ChatGPT or Gen AI can support those areas. So it's just a good example of how a profession is thinking positively about AI and all of the different ways that it can support the work that they're doing. So we're gonna switch gears and actually get into the example now and look at a Wichita position for a job that was posted through the city of Wichita. I am gonna try to fly through this because we have 2 use case examples and I don't know if we'll be able to get to both. So we're gonna see. But what we wanna know is if this job description clearly states what the job is, what the expectations are for someone to be successful. It's a job for an equipment operator for street maintenance. And I think we have some additional details here too. Okay, so for this, we have kind of a 3-prompt strategy that we wanted to show you guys today. So the first part is going to be instructing ChatGPT to create some clarification questions that are answered by the individual who is updating the job description. And the reason for that is because the questions serve as a checklist for the updater to ensure that the necessary information is included and is clearly articulated in the description. Then strategy 2 is going to be telling ChatGPT to update that job description using the answers that it gave you in the last prompt. So it's just using that feedback to make those specific improvements, making sure the description is clear, correctly outlines what the job actually does involve. And then the third part of this is going to be providing those review and edit instructions to ChatGPT. So asking for some brief explanations of each change. And this is just to help ensure that there's a very thorough review of the content, clarifies the purpose of each of those edits to help enhance the clarity and the relevance. So let's talk about this first one. You've uploaded the document for this first prompt of our 3-prompt strategy, and this is what you would put into that little gray box. You are an HR professional. Review the job description and generate a list of clarification questions about the job description that should be addressed by the person responsible for updating it. Pretty straightforward. And then this is what it gives us. So it talks a little bit about shifts and scheduling. These are just part of it. I think it gave us like 8 total things to consider, but these are just examples. So shift and scheduling, what are the expectations for overtime or emergency shift work? And then it'll tell you what you do is you go through all of those questions and you put together a response. So you're answering the question to provide more context to ChatGPT so that it can give you, the kind of overview, combined, better version of what you're looking for. So shifts and scheduling, work conditions. Can you clarify the expectations around exposure to inclement weather? How frequently are we going to be expected to work in extreme weather conditions like heat, snow, and ice? So then you put the response there too. I just have it as an example, and ChatGPT helped me make these responses too. So if they're not good, don't blame me. Then tools and safety. So what safety training or certifications are required for the operation of jackhammers, chainsaws, other heavy equipment? How often is maintenance expected to be performed? Will employees receive training? Yada, yada, yada. So when we put these responses together, you can put that in kind of your second prompt to it and say, update the job description using the information provided in the answers, maybe below, like you just copy and paste. Include the original text followed by the modified text for every section. Okay, and then this is what it will give you. So shifts and scheduling, it changed the original text from the day and hours for this position, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. through 4:30. But based on the response that I gave it, it changed it to the standard work schedule is Monday through Friday from 8 to 4:30 p.m. However, overtime may be required during emergency situations such as snow and ice removal. Employees might be asked to work overnight shifts or weekends in the case of emergencies. So it's just giving a little bit more context, a little bit more clarity about what the expectations might actually look like for shifts and scheduling. And then it'll do the same thing for the work conditions piece. So the original text is there. It requires working outdoors in inclement weather, rain, snow, ice, sleet, heat, humidity, all of that good stuff. But then the modified text based on our response says this position will frequently require working outdoors in extreme weather, including all those things. Employees must be prepared to work year-round in these conditions to respond to emergencies or maintenance needs for inclement weather, which might include overnight. So it's just kind of giving some more clarity about what's expected. Then we go into the tools and safety. So ability to use a jackhammer and chainsaw safely and effectively was in the original text. Ability to maintain balance and tolerate riding heavy equipment over rough terrain for long periods of time. Then based on our response that we had to it, it said employees are required to undergo mandatory safety training, including certifications for the safe and effective use of jackhammers, chainsaws, and other heavy equipment. Training will include daily or weekly equipment maintenance procedures. Employees will be provided with ongoing safety and operational training. So again, it's just a little bit more forward, a little bit more clear about what those expectations would be.
And I'll add, I think this is a good example of when we do some of this work, we have blind spots that we just miss those things. And so the system's really good at catching them.
Definitely, for sure. So then another thing to think about too, in the case of jobs description specifically, is just, is the job description even compelling? Does it clearly state why someone should or would want to work there? And then is the language inclusive and free of any bias? So in our third prompt for our 3-prompt strategy, this is the review and edit piece here. So as we get into the review and edit piece, we want to keep in mind those considerations. Is it compelling? Does it state why someone would want to work there? Is the language inclusive, free of bias? So this is the prompt that we would potentially want to put in there. You're an HR professional, review and edit the job description to ensure that it is compelling and clearly states why an individual should work there. Include language that promotes diversity among applicants, identify and edit language that is not inclusive or free of bias, provide brief explanations for each modification and the reasons behind these changes, because it's nice to see kind of the logic and why it's doing what it's doing. And then in the output, you'll get, okay, so the original text, it's the kind of introduction to the job description. So it's a skilled work operating specialized automotive equipment. Work includes servicing, minor repairs. You guys can read, we're running out of time. I'm not going to go through all of this, but all of it to say is that it gives kind of a more clear, more forward description in its ChatGPT suggestion that definitely is a little bit more compelling, I would say, than the original text, and the explanation below explains like why it changed things. So I've made the description by framing the roles as having a positive impact on the community. I'm helping prospective employees see the value in their work and contributing to the safety and the infrastructure. And phrases like valuable leadership experience also just kind of help make it a little bit more attractive. And then this is another example of that. So just enhancing those candidate experience requirements. I think we are going to have these slides available for you guys after this. So if you want to read these in more detail, you can for sure do that there, but I won't get into this too much since we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah, and so I'll kind of speed through this example too, because we want to have time on the ethics piece. We wanted to share an example of updating policies. So one of the things that we were given through one of our past relationships was the social media policy for Harvey County. So I don't know if anyone on works for Harvey County. They have general social media policy, purpose, definition, comments and interactions management were the 4 categories in this policy. So with permission, we dropped it in and asked it to review the attached policy, generate a list of clarifying questions about the policy, right? What are we missing? Next, provide responses to those questions based on the language included in the policy. And it gave us a bunch. 2 that we called out because we wanted to dive in a little bit more is it said, are there any examples of undue solicitation of goods, services, and commerce as referenced in the policy? So it said you couldn't do that. I didn't know what that meant. So this question stuck out for me. It also mentioned something about, how does the Kansas Open Records Act apply to the content? Because CORA was mentioned, but it didn't give any details about it. So we would either, as Taylor said, provide responses to these questions, or in this case, we took the shortcut. We asked ChatGPT to respond to those. So for the first example, the policy does not provide examples. Okay. And the second one, it made reference of Quora making the content potentially a public record and subject to disclosure. So, okay, based off these responses, include proposed changes, the same thing we did before, original language, and explain the rationale. So it added the original text, the proposed change, and the rationale that, it clarifies what undue solicitation is. That's not a term I use regularly, and I bet most people don't. So what does that look like in action? And on the second one about Quora, so now we actually have a little bit of explanation. The county social media is subject to Quora, good to know. And this means that any content posted on social media platforms, including comments, messages, interactions, are all part of that open record. So now it goes from a fuzzy sentence to a little bit more detail of what that means. So we don't always want to make policies longer, but sometimes making sure that we have clarity is super important. So ethics, responsible use, I know we're getting close to the end of time. The biggest thing when we think about guidelines or policies at the organization or team level, we want to take a step back and ask some of these questions. What are our concerns? What do we want to protect ourselves or our organization from? That's what we want to create policies and guidelines around. What's the AI literacy of our organization? Are there 2 people that know how to use it, or is everyone using it and we're just not talking about it? What do we want to achieve with AI? So it's not just an open floodgate of let's use it for everything. Like let's look for some specific wins and ways to do things better with these systems. And again, let's have open conversations about that. And I know we've touched on this a little bit. There's a lot we could go over on the ethical concerns and things we need to be thinking about. And this goes with use and with any guidelines we might develop. Data privacy is one of those biggest things, making sure that staff are compliant and trained up on these things. We do a lot of work, I mentioned, in public health, so HIPAA is a big thing. That applies to everything. Are there situations and circumstances we need to have some AI conversations? Like if our software starts adopting AI, what questions are we asking about that? We mentioned bias. I always say these systems are built off biased data. They pull from biased sources. We need to be aware of that. We need to have conversations about how we identify and spot those things, largely through training and subject matter experts, making sure that people are reviewing these things, which goes to human oversight. We need to make sure we understand the importance of not allowing staff, not saying that it's okay just to copy and paste from the system, whether they say it's from the system or they try to copy it off as their own work. We need to make sure that human oversight is never lost in any of these processes. And one of the important reasons for that is the next on authorship and transparency. We want to know if these systems are being used. If there are systems out there kind of classifying or making judgments on whether or not we have access to different things, like we want to know that AI was part of that. So how are we being transparent about that? And that's not always a positive reaction. Not everyone really responds well to knowing AI systems are making these decisions. And the authorship piece, who owns it? There's definitely going to be a lot of legal considerations for this. Generally, the consensus is like ChatGPT doesn't own that, so the human that put the stuff in there is who has some ownership levels. But this is really murky territory. So I think we'll see a lot more things come out in law in the next few years to help make sense of this. And lastly, next steps for you all, like we know that we need ethical guidelines established for organizations. Let's go ahead and have these conversations, develop these guidelines with an open mind. We're always happy to chat about these things if you want to dive in deeper. Talk about where we can use these systems again. So it's not just anything and everything. Let's talk about data privacy. Set your organization kind of on the right path with these conversations. We will continue to do these types of trainings. Again, we update these all the time. We try to do more as more things develop. We've branched out to a couple of different systems, but really it all comes down to the prompt engineering, doing it right with these systems, innovative uses, and then coming back to this element. How do we do these things ethically and responsibly? So that was a lot that we just covered in 60 minutes. I see that we've got slides and things added to the chat. If you want to download those, I assume that we have a evaluation if that hasn't been dropped in. But I think that's it for us. I know we're out of time unless there's a couple of quick questions to answer, but Carrie, I'll throw it over to you.
Great, thank you. If you do have questions, I put email for Zane, our series host, and myself in the chat. You can reach out to us and we can connect you to Erin and Taylor, or Erin and Taylor. You can put your emails in the chat if you would like. I also put the slides in the chat. And finally, we would appreciate your feedback on our workshop series. We want to know how we're doing and how we can improve, and also any additional topics that you'd like to know more about. So take that short evaluation and let us know what you think. And we appreciate you all being here today and spending the hour with us and helping us successfully kick off our first of this workshop series. So thank you again and have a great rest of your day. We hope to see you next week when we will be hearing information from Seth Bate um, on I lost my note. Nonprofit boards, self-evaluation of nonprofit boards. I apologize. So again, join us next week for that information on evaluating nonprofit boards. Have a good day.